Derek Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on behalf of New Zealand First and actually on behalf of Barbara Stewart, our spokesperson for this bill, to speak on the Home Community Support Payment for Travel Between Client Settlement Bill. I'd like to begin by stating first and foremost that this bill formalises in legislation an already agreed settlement negotiated between the estimated 24,000 home community support service workers, unions, providers and DHBs to ensure home and community-based care and support workers receive compensation for the time and cost of travel between clients. For this reason, New Zealand First will be supporting this bill through to Select Committee stage 2. Having said that, we in New Zealand First hold firm reservations about the process with which this bill came into the House and its glaring flaws with what it is trying to achieve. The bill is an example of the government acting on the worst of motivations. Rather than delivering what is right and what is fair for New Zealand workers, the government has chosen to take an underhanded approach and legislate one of the most deserving, most undervalued workforces out of what is rightfully theirs. The truth is the only reason this bill is in this House is because the government wants to stop legal action from the home and community support workforce and remove any liability for the $261 million of back payments for travel expenses of which the sector is entitled. But what is worse is that the only reason the government wants to stop that legal action is because they do not want to set a precedent within the wider labour market regarding what can be considered work under the Minimum Wage Act. The costs of future action due to this precedent are unknown, but officials have already warned it to be significant.
Order. Can I just ask the member to resume his seat? And I've reflected on what he said at the beginning, and also note that I've been sent from the spokesperson, but I do want to warn the member that he is not allowed just to read out a speech, even if it has been prepared by or for another member. If the member really wants someone else's speech on the record of the House, the member can table it, but he actually has to give a speech, not read it out. Derek Ball.
So the decision to bring this legislation to the House is not motivated to help New Zealand workers and what they deserve. Instead, it's providing a bare minimum of compromises in terms of actual expenditure and in order to prevent care workers receiving what they actually deserve. And in the end, sir, it is actually stopping New Zealand workers in the future from trying to justifiably seek compensation for work they are currently doing. And in fact, sir, workers should not actually have to go to the courts and take this sort of action in order for them to get rightfully what is theirs. At this point, sir, I'd like to touch on what the HCS workforce is actually to receive. The interim solution between 1 July 2015 and 29 February 2016, the workforce will be paid a figure that represents the minimum wage for the average time spent travelling between clients. And from 1st of March 2016, this will change to employees being compensated at the minimum wage for qualifying travel time and to receive no less than 50 cents per kilometre for that qualifying time. Yet the IRD actually estimates the per kilometre reasonable expenditure to be around 74 cents per kilometre incurred by an employee, and that includes the petrol prices as well. So if that's the case, legislating for just up to 50 cents per kilometre will fail to achieve the actual bill's designed intent and aim in the first place, and obviously that doesn't fairly compensate the HCS workforce for the travel times and the costs that they incur. Therefore, it actually shows that it represents a further example of the government legislation that claims to be having a meaningful change, where in fact they're asking the organisations to do more with less. And if you look at Part B of the terms of the settlement, and although that part is not actually included within the provisions of the bill itself, it does remain important and relevant, and actually focusing on what it does, it focuses on the commitment from all the parties towards a regularised workforce within 24 months following the settlement taking effect. And quoting directly from the health report to the Minister of Health related to this commitment, it sums up exactly why regulation is needed in the first place, and I quote, "The regularised model is expected to be beneficial for all parties and will ensure continued viability of HCSS as a cost-effective alternative to residential care. However," quote, "such progress is subject to affordability and implementation occurring within available funding." So the available funding that's available at the moment, being the $38 million, sir, that was put forward for the additional costs of the travel expenses and the workforce, is again asking HCS to deliver more, but without giving them any more investment necessary to make it work. In other words, the settlement agreement and the bill in particular is not the government riding in to save the day for HCS, as they would have us believe, but rather a demonstration of how badly mismanaged the HCS is being, and the lack of future planning that has gone into home and community service support from this government in the first place. Even having withheld the $261 million in the first place, sir, the government still cannot deliver sufficient funding to implement necessary changes. So, yes, New Zealand First will be supporting this piece of legislation through to Select Committee because it is a step in the right direction, but it is the least that can be done. There needs to be, in fact, a dramatic overhaul of the entire funding of the sector with a focus on workforce planning to future-proof New Zealand from the coming crisis and our care workforce. This needs to be only the start of a continued effort by government to get the funding and the organisation for this sector right and to give the home and community service support workforce the support they actually deserve. Thank you, sir.
Stuart Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's a pleasure to speak on this community support payment for travel